Hi, and welcome to the Win-Win Women's Network and this show called Your Inside Power, where we are trying to get you to understand the powers that are inside of you that can absolutely change your life all around. So today, what I wanted to share with you is how to overcome defeat, because it's not difficult to overcome defeat if you know how to counteract that defeat. So I want to share with you a quote that I absolutely love and that I want you to really start taking to heart. This is by Steve Bowen. He says, God's gift to you is more talent and ability than you will ever hope to use in your lifetime. Your gift to God is to develop as much of that talent and ability as you can in your lifetime. You see, so often we have a lot of talents and abilities that we don't even realize. I remember when I first went into business for myself, one of the most frustrating things to me was dealing with a computer. Now, it wasn't necessarily that I hadn't used computers before, because I did in a line of work that I did previously, which was as a teacher and educator. But what I was doing now was so different than what I had done before. And I remember asking my daughter, who was very tech savvy, to help me with this, that, and the other thing. And, she would just come in and she would just start doing things. And, I had to stop her and say, Renee, that doesn't help me to understand what I'm doing if you just do it for me. But she got too frustrated with having to go at the pace that I had to write things down and so I could remember them after she had left. But my point is, that was very frustrating, and it could have been very defeating to me, and I could have given up at that point because it was just so much of a learning curve to overcome. But I kept going at it because I had a vision and a goal of what I wanted to do. You see, and just like in this quote, I had far more talent and ability to be able to understand the computer and the programs I was using than I gave myself credit for. And when I allowed myself to have that talent and ability to shine through, then I was able to give back to others. And so that was my gift back to others, was because I was willing to overcome what was difficult for me at first. Well, here's the thing. You see, most of us live by our senses, what we can see, hear, smell, taste, and feel, or touch. And there's nothing wrong with living through your senses. That's what we've been given. That's what every animal in the animal kingdom has. We all have those senses. And that's how we tend to interact with the world. We hear something, we see something, and then we have to make sense of it. Now, what separates human beings from the other animals in the animal kingdom is we have been given and gifted with 6 intellectual faculties. And these 6 intellectual faculties are our imagination, our intuition, our memory, our perception, our reason, and our will. And those 6 intellectual faculties make us completely different than any other animal in the animal kingdom. You see, most of the animals, they act completely by instinct. But as human beings, we can use those 6 faculties. And with those 6 faculties, we can do almost anything we want in the world. Now, I want to read you a quote, because I know probably a lot of you have heard of the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And probably many of you have read it. And I think I already told my story about being in a book club with people that had attempted to read Think and Grow Rich. But in Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill says, an educated person is not necessarily one who has an abundant or general or specialized knowledge. An educated person is one who has so developed the faculties of their minds that they may acquire anything they want or its equivalent without violating the rights of others. Now, see, we can be highly educated. We can have a lot of information going around in our conscious mind because all our education is in our conscious mind. And we've talked about the conscious and subconscious mind in a previous episode. I would suggest you go back and watch those because there are differences. But in our conscious mind, we can have all this information stored up there that we've been taught. And it can be general knowledge or it can be specialized knowledge. And that will only take you so far. You know, have you ever seen people that are highly intelligent people? And maybe they were the straight A students in school, maybe they're their PhD candidates or, you know, have their PhD. They're just highly educated with one degree after another degree after another. And yet they are living completely average, sometimes even mediocre lives. Because even though they are highly intelligent, they have never been able to develop these 6 intellectual faculties in their mind. One of my mentors was telling a story that he went to a conference, which he was asked to come present on and talk about the mind and how it works. And these were all educators. And I, being a former educator, I would have fallen into this exact group. But he asked these educators, do any of you know what the 6 intellectual faculties are? And these educators had no idea what he was talking about. Well, I didn't either until I was taught them, because as an educator, I was never schooled in what the 6 intellectual faculties are. And in fact, one of the most important one, as far as achieving your success that you want in life, one of the most important intellectual faculties is imagination. And yet, maybe you were a victim of this when you were in school. Maybe you know somebody was a victim of this, but how many teachers have you ever heard that said, Johnny, you need to be paying attention. Mary, put that away and pay attention to me. Or Susie, would you get back down here and listen to me? And you see, every time a child hears that, either in a school setting or maybe a parent is saying, you know, get off of cloud 9 or whatever. And every time you hear that, you think it's wrong to be in your imagination. Well, after I learned these 6 intellectual faculties, I was still teaching school. And I remember one day, just one of the nicest students I had, he was just staring, just totally not paying attention to anything I was teaching. And so I was not one to really ever say things like that to kids, because I learned early on in my teaching career that the best way to get a child to pay attention if they weren't listening, rather than saying something, because when you say something as a teacher, you're interrupting the whole flow of the class and whole flow of what you may be explaining. And so the best thing to do was to just move towards that child. And 9 times out of 10, or maybe even 99% of the time, that stops whatever was happening. So I used that technique and I went over towards this young man and I got really close. And it was so funny because the other kids that were sitting around him were kind of smiling because they could see the exact same thing I was seeing, that he was just in his imagination and not paying any attention. And as I moved closer to him, it had zero effect on him. And I knew, you know, he was a really good child, so he was not trying to like totally ignore me. And so I kept moving closer and closer until I was right in front of him. And it didn't even matter. It was like I was totally invisible. And finally, I just kind of leaned down as quietly as I could say it. And I'm sure the children around him heard me, but as quietly as I could say, as I said, and I'll just say Johnny, because that wasn't his name, but I said, Johnny, I don't know where you are, but it must be really beautiful. But could you just come back with me just for a little bit? Now, what did I do there? You see, in that instance, I didn't tell him, you should be paying attention to me because I am far more important than your imagination. No, that's not what I said at all. I acknowledged that his imagination was super important. I just needed him to come back just for now. but it wasn't that he couldn't go back to his imagination. You know, I remember my one daughter, when she was little, it was our oldest daughter. So she would, come up with these crazy games. We'd be at the beach and she'd, invent these strange games with these strange rules, and she'd change it, and, just very, very creative. And she was making it up. And often she was making it up as she went. And she was using her imagination, which was a beautiful thing. You see, the imagination is how you're going to achieve your dreams and your goals. It's not going to be by following some rule or looking at even an affirmation. It's going to be building that beautiful picture, just like my student had done, building that beautiful picture in your mind, and then creating that image that you really want to have in your life. So let me just share, one of my favorite books is by Wallace D. Wattles, and it's called The Science of Getting Rich. And in The Science of Getting Rich, Wattles talks about thinking. You see, so few people think. We think, but we're just thinking surface thoughts. We're not thinking deep thoughts. More people spend time thinking about their vacation and planning a vacation than they do planning their life. And it's so sad, because when you do that, then you just live by your senses, and whatever's happening around you, that's where you go. But listen to what Wallace says. He says, to think what you want to think is to think truth. To think what you want to think. You see, we create our own reality. So we're thinking our truth, regardless of appearance. So again, to think what you want to think is to think truth, regardless of appearance. Every man has a natural and inherent power to think what he wants to think. But it requires far more effort to do this than it does to think thoughts which are suggested by appearance. You see, what's around us, it's easy to see and believe what is there, but it's really difficult to believe in the truth of what we want, the truth of the appearance that we want to have in our lives. That's very difficult. To think according to appearance is easy. To think truth, regardless of appearance, is laborious and requires the expenditure of more power than any other work man is called upon to perform. So this is what using your imagination is thinking the truth that you want, thinking regardless of appearance. Chances are, if you're looking for an abundant life, a bigger life, a lifestyle that you currently do not have, when you continue to look at the situation you're in, it's difficult. But you see, you create your own reality. And because of your thoughts and your feelings and your actions, that's gotten you to where you are today. And every action you have done, you've created the situation you're in. And sometimes that's hard for us to understand. And sometimes it's hard for us to want to believe that we are actually creating in our lives things that we really don't want. So I want to tell you today about using your imagination and why using your imagination is the key to get you to where you want to go in life. So your imagination is built upon your relationship with the spiritual world and with your physical world. And what we have to understand is that, our minds are connected. When we talked about the conscious mind and the subconscious mind is what we often will refer to as the universal mind. And we can actually connect with others through our universal minds. It's really funny. The other day, I had gotten a message on my phone, and it was a message about calling this person back because I had to change an appointment. And so I didn't have time that day to deal with it. I kind of glanced at the message and thought, okay, I'll deal with this later. And so the next day I was doing some work, and all of a sudden I thought, okay, I need to call them back. At that very moment that I was ready to pick up my phone and call this business back, my phone was ringing, and it was them. And it was so funny. I was just ready to call you. You see, what happened there was the thought was in my mind, I got to call them back. And the thought was in their mind, they got to call me back because they hadn't heard from me in 24 hours or whatever. And so they were calling me. At the very moment my phone rang, I just was ready to pick my phone up and call them. You see, that's how the universal minds connect. And I bet that's happened to you. That's not the first time that's happened to me. I can remember times when I was thinking of a friend and thinking I should call them, and the phone rings and it's them. You see, that's how our minds are actually connected. There are inventors. Thomas Edison, perfect one. When he'd get really stumped on an invention, he would just take a short cat nap, 10, 20 minutes, and he would just sit there and think about the problem and just rest. And a lot of times when, he came out of that little cat nap, he had the solution to what he was looking for. Or at least he had a possible answer to move forward with whatever experiment he had. And it's amazing how those minds connect. I read another story one time. This man was looking at a fossil, but it wasn't completed. And he wasn't sure what it was, a fish, and he wasn't sure what this prehistoric fish actually looked like. And so he drew out part of it, and he was thinking about it as he went to sleep one night. And in the middle of the night, this vision came to him as to what the rest of the fossil should look like. And when he woke up, he tried to draw it, but he couldn't. He couldn't figure out what it was. And so then, the next night he did the same thing. He was thinking about it. And when he woke up, he had a vision of what it looked like. And he tried to draw, but he couldn't figure it quite out. Well, then the third night, he decided to put a piece of paper beside his nightstand so that when he thought of this fish, he could draw it. And so that's what he did. In the middle of the night, he woke up again, he drew this fish. And when he got up in the morning, he saw the paper. He totally was unconscious that he was doing that in the middle of the night, but he saw the vision of what the fossil should look like, and he was able to find it then. You see, that's the connection of the universal mind, giving him that kind of information. So we never quite know, what's going to come to us and how we can utilize that information. You see, if you just live through your senses and you don't use your imagination, or you don't use any of those 6 intellectual faculties, your life is going to be much different than if you actually do utilize those intellectual faculties. So what we have to realize is that the whole world operates by laws. And you see, those laws work the same for you as they do for me, as they do for anybody. And so one of the things we have to do when we use our imagination is to build that beautiful picture. So if you're thinking about how can I have a bigger life than what I currently have right now, let's talk about building that imagination. And when we build your imagination, what we're doing is you're coming up with an idea. So this is what I usually do. I write down what my goal is. And I always start it out with, I'm so happy and grateful now that, and then, I'll put a date there, now that by, the end of March, now that by December 31st, whatever you want to use, and you put that date down with that. I'm so happy and grateful now that by blah, 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 I am. And did you hear what I said? I am, not I will, because we want to keep this in present tense. So I am earning, I am, promoted, I am in a new job, whatever it is that you want. And then after you have that written down, take about 10 minutes and just put on some really quiet music and meditate. And as you're meditating, build the image of what that looked like in your mind. What kind of things, let's say it was a monetary goal. What kind of things are you now doing because you have earned that money? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? Do you hear people saying, I'm so proud of you? One of the things I hear when I do mine is my kids saying, Mom, I'm so proud of you. Look what you have achieved. Hearing those people that you admire, your mentors, saying you did it. You finally achieved your goal. Now, what's your next goal, right? But, it's building that image, the sounds, the people that are there, the conversations you're having. Maybe you're at a new position. So maybe you are in a leadership position at work, and now you're talking to the people that are the people you're responsible for, and you're giving them instructions. You're introducing yourself as their new leader, and you're getting ideas from them. You're having these conversations. You see, you can build this beautiful image and just continue with it over and over again in your mind, and, keep figuring out what's that looking like. And you see, as you build that image, that idea is going into your subconscious mind. Well, what happens in your subconscious mind? It connects with the universe. Now, I know I've told you this story, and if you haven't heard this story, you might want to go back and look at previous episodes. But the one episode I was telling you about my son who earned a full scholarship to college. And see, he so embedded that idea in his subconscious mind. And as he would go to any ball practice, he was going to earn a college scholarship, and that was foremost in his thought. He believed in himself. He actually told me at one point that since he told me that he was going to earn a college scholarship, he figured he had to do it. So, it became not only a burning desire, but it became something he had to do. Okay, so he kept building that image, and he didn't realize what he was doing. I didn't realize what he was doing until I went on my own journey to figure this out. But as he did that, he was building this image in his mind of what it looked like to be a collegiate athlete, to have a full scholarship, to open that envelope and see that full scholarship. You see, when he opened his envelope, even though I didn't believe he was going to get full scholarship, I never believed it. And when he opened that envelope, he said, Mom, wouldn't it be funny if this is a full scholarship? And I kept saying to him, now, they only told us a third to a half is the most you could expect. You see, I didn't want him to feel disappointed in himself. I wanted him to realize whatever he got was a blessing. But he told me that when he opened that envelope, even though I said that to him, there was no doubt in his mind there was a full scholarship. Now, how did that happen? It shouldn't have happened. There were so many things that were so negative along the way, should not have happened. But you see, he built this image in his mind. And here's the thing. When you build that image in your mind and you repeat it over and over again, it has to happen. That's the law. And that law works for you. That law works for me. That law works for anybody. Now, you might say to me, well, there's been times when I've wanted something and it didn't happen. Probably is. I would definitely agree with that. I know there's been times in my life when I want something to happen and it never happened. But do you know why? Because we didn't repeat it. I didn't build the image. I didn't do that. I just would, I would think about it maybe once or twice, and maybe once a month, maybe once every couple months. but I didn't repeat it over and over again. Well, why not? Because I really didn't believe it. You see, if you don't believe it can happen, you're not going to repeat it. Why waste your time? You see, every time my son went to practice or to a game, no matter what sport it was in, he was thinking scholarship. Every time for 6 years in 3 sports. When I learned what he had done, I did the same thing. I wanted to change jobs. I wanted to go from being an educator of children to training corporately. And so as I went into my school every day, I wasn't thinking about teaching kids. I pretended in my mind I was teaching a group of adults and doing corporate training. Now, I didn't train them as I would in a corporate training situation, but the point is, I was pretending in my mind that that's what I was doing. I wasn't teaching little kids. I was teaching adults. And within months, I got my call to come and do training. You see, that's when I realized that that works. And it works every time, but there's a couple things you have to do. You have to build that image. And it has to be clarified. And I have clients that have done this. They built the image. I had a client who was like more of a handyman type job, and they really wanted to have build luxury homes and commercial buildings. That was their goal. It wasn't to, fix a door or put in a window every once in a while. It was to build beautiful homes. And they kept building that image and building that image. And every year they would double or triple their income as they were building that image. And today, that's all they do. They build, luxury homes and they build commercial buildings. It doesn't necessarily happen overnight for them. It took a couple years, but that's what we do. That's how we build the image. You have to build it in your imagination. And you see, as you continue to build it, the reason you repeat it over and over is because as you continue to build it in your imagination, you build the belief. Now, if you don't do that, your life's going to end up pretty much the way it is now. I have a friend who has an accounting and tax business, and she says, most people's taxes don't change much from year to year. Most people's incomes just don't change. Oh yeah, they might get their, 1, 2, or 3% raise, but they don't change because most people don't believe they can. And why is that? Because they don't follow the laws of the universe. They allow the world to dictate what they can have and what they can accomplish instead of choosing to be the magic in their dreams and choosing to build the reality that they want, as Wallace D. Wallace talks about. So I have a couple things in the chat section here. I suggest you go and click on the link that will take you to my 5-day challenge, where I'm going to show you some techniques as to how to do this so that your life you can unleash those powers inside of you and build the reality that you want. And then I also suggest that you register for my 3-day event, because during that event, you are going to be blown away with the things that the laws of the universe will help you with. And, to change your life from living average life to living an extraordinary life. So go from ordinary to extraordinary, because that's what most people really want to do. And I'm sure that's what, we're supposed to be here to build this beautifully abundant life. And, when we do that, then our lives change for the better. So this is Patricia Stepler, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode of overcoming defeat by using your imagination. And this is your inside power, and I want you to be the magic in your dreams.